Welcome to this recorded version of the Scottish Attainment Challenge and the Early Years Session 1 that was delivered on Wednesday the 15th of June by the Attainment Advisor and Early Learning and Childcare teams. My name is Alan Fleming and I will be leading you through this information with my colleague Nicola Henry. Today's session will provide an overview of the refreshed Scottish Attainment Challenge and how this links to some of the work that you're already doing in the early years, including links to realising the ambition and identifying the practice that is already happening that is working towards achieving excellence and equity for Scotland's children. Session 2 in September will have a focus on what data is available to us and how this can be used to identify gaps and take actions to address these. Session 3 in November will explore effective pedagogical approaches in the early years, linking to child-led pedagogy and realising the ambition. Again, this will make links between the practice that is already happening in settings and how we can use the knowledge from sessions 1 and 2 to complement this. The National Practice Guidance for Early Years in Scotland, Realising the Ambition, highlights the importance of child-led pedagogy. Starting with the child and reflecting on the child as an individual within their environment and as part of their surrounding culture ensures that we know our children and their families' needs really well. As you can see from the quote on the screen, we need to ensure that our offer to children is high quality. In order to ensure this offer is high quality, it is essential that we reflect on what we already know about our children and their families, what is working well and what could be changed, started or stopped. In order to reflect on our provision, we need to know what information is available to us and what can be used to impact positively on children's outcomes. Nationally, there is a focus on ensuring excellence and equity for children and their families, and this is evident within a number of key documents within the education landscape across Scotland. I'm going to hand over to Nicola now, who will explain further about Scotland's focus on excellence and equity and how this links to the early years.
The policy landscape implementing change within the early years is vast. These are a few of the key documents which are steering the direction of travel for educational reform and change. The National Improvement Framework was refreshed in December 2021 and considered the main recommendations from several reviews, including Audit Scotland's Improving Outcomes for Young People Through School Education, the OECD's Review of Curriculum for Excellence report Into the Future, and the National Equity Audit undertaken during the pandemic. These reviews identified the need for a coordinated response to combating the effects of the pandemic and recovery, a need to continue efforts to close the poverty-related attainment gap, the importance of developing the range and consistency of education data, and putting children and young people at the centre of everything that we do. We will take a look at some of these publications more in depth to raise awareness of how the Scottish Attainment Challenge is so important to the early years. The National Improvement Framework, refreshed in December 2021, clearly sets out its agenda for excellence and equity. It is imperative that those in the education system at all levels ensure that every child achieves the highest standards in literacy and numeracy and the right range of skills, qualifications and achievements to allow them to succeed. This relentless focus on achieving equity for all is still central to the vision of the National Improvement Framework. The Scottish Attainment Challenge is a vehicle to support this equity agenda. As identified within the OECD report on improving schools in Scotland, we must be rigorous about closing the poverty-related attainment gap, as well as raising the attainment of all. Working closely with and supporting the work of the early years will be critical to achieving these aims of the National Improvement Framework. It is refreshing to see the ELC specifically included now in the refreshed drivers and priorities for the National Improvement Framework. As mentioned earlier, I am sure it will be welcomed to note the positive changes within the refreshed NIF. It clearly articulates an inclusion of ELC and the importance of representing all sectors and those who work within them. One of the main changes to the vision is a focus on improving outcomes. It also highlights the importance of ensuring that every child and young person has the same opportunity to succeed, no matter what their background or protected characteristics. This emphasises the importance of not just equity, but of equalities too. It is also important that those working within our education system are champions for equality, equity, and children and young people's rights. The refreshed NIF recognises that human rights need to be at the centre of all we do. This is a very welcome addition from All in Education. And finally, it is great to see that the new NIF for 2022 has included ELC and practitioners, not only teachers, within the drivers. This is clearly communicating the importance of the ELC and the work of the adults within it in achieving its vision and aims. Within the refreshed NIF, there are a set of measures which all local authorities need to report on to Scottish Government each year. The 11 measures in the left-hand side column are from the National Improvement Framework. These include the 27 to 30 month review, the Health and Wellbeing Difficulty Score for children aged 4 to 12 and young people aged 13 to 15. There is also the Primary 1, Primary 4, Primary 7 ACEL data for literacy and numeracy. ACEL data is the annual collection of teacher judgments on whether a child has achieved the Curriculum for Excellence early level at Primary 1, first level at Primary 4, and second level at Primary 7. This is only collected for Primary 1s, Primary 4s, Primary 7s each year. However, schools will track every learner's progress towards achievement of the level. ACEL data for S3 is the same, but it captures the S3 learners who have achieved third level by S3, as well as those who may have achieved fourth level. The SCQF levels stand for the Scottish Credit and Qualifications Framework and recognises the national qualifications such as level 4, 5, 6 or above. And finally, the annual participation measure for 16 to 19-year-olds measures the number of young people who are in positive destinations after secondary school. This might be in further education, higher education, employment, volunteering, for example. We will now pause and reflect and have an opportunity for discussion. Take a moment to consider what happens in your setting to ensure the offer to children in the early years is high quality. What key aspects of work in the early years ensures that children's rights are at the heart of learning? And finally, what are your thoughts around the more prominent inclusion of ELC in the refreshed National Improvement Framework and other key documents? When considering the Scottish Attainment Challenge, it is important to reflect on the why. Why is the challenge so important to those in Scotland? As you will all be aware, the cost of living crisis is affecting our most vulnerable families. Those who were struggling before are now finding themselves in even more challenging circumstances. Please take a moment to read through some of the statements on this slide. The data within them is a stark reminder of the financial difficulties our families and communities are trying to cope with at present. Looking more specifically at the Scottish context, more than 1 in 4 children in Scotland are officially recognised as living in poverty. That is approximately 260,000 children. In the absence of significant policy change, this figure is likely to increase in the coming years, with Scottish Government forecasts indicating that it will reach 38% by 2030-31. Analysis by the Resolution Foundation also suggests that the Scottish child poverty rate will be 29% by 2023-24, the highest rate in over 20 years. This would reverse the fall in child poverty observed in the UK since the late 1990s. 68% of children in poverty live in working households. With the reality of poverty in Scotland in mind, let's now look at the refreshed Scottish Attainment Challenge. In November 2021, the Cabinet Secretary for Education and Skills set out plans for a refreshed Scottish Attainment Challenge to begin in April 2022. The mission of this refreshed challenge recognises the need to reflect the breadth of achievements and experiences and the importance of health and well-being to contribute to improved outcomes for children and young people, including through improved post-school participation in positive destinations. This represents strengthened alignment with the Curriculum for Excellence and the findings of the OECD and Audit Scotland reports, which indicated the need for stronger national and local data on the wider benefits of Scottish education. The new refreshed mission also acknowledges Articles 29 and 31 of the UNCRC. Within the framework for recovery and progress, there are clear roles and responsibilities given at school, local and national level in relation to the refreshed mission. At local authority level, there will be the requirement to develop a set of stretch aims in relation to the measures within the framework, as shared earlier, as well as the opportunity to set local stretch aims which are relevant to the context of the authority. In early discussions, some local authorities have considered the use of measures within the early years, such as developmental milestones and capturing data around transition information. These stretch aims are due at the end of September and will be available from your local authority central team. Within the new Scottish Attainment Challenge, pupil equity funding has now been set for 4 financial years from this year to allow more strategic planning in its use to help improve outcomes of learners impacted by poverty. All 32 local authorities will also receive funding through a strategic equity fund over the next 4 years to direct resources at the system to again support the mission. This again may be an opportunity to involve the early years within this funding in some local authorities. Funding for care experienced children and young people continues to ensure additional resource is given to our vulnerable learners. And national programmes continue, such as the Child Poverty Action Group, who support settings with reducing the cost of the school or ELC day. To summarise, this is the allocation of the Scottish Attainment Challenge funding for the next 4 years. Approximately £1 billion has been allocated in total for 2022 to 2026. This has been allocated in 3 different streams as detailed previously. The Strategic Equity Fund goes directly to local authorities, Pupil Equity Funding, which is available directly to schools, and the Care Experienced Children and Young People Fund. The principles from the new refreshed Scottish Attainment Challenge are nothing new to the early years and those who work within it. Everyday practices have been well established to ensure that all learners are achieving their potential. Some examples of the things that settings already do to achieve equity that links directly to the Scottish Attainment Challenge include things such as using a child-led pedagogical approach with children's needs, interests and rights at the centre. The use of high-quality observations, leading to gathering robust data and using that data to meet learners' needs. And also the well-established family support and family learning sessions that ELCs offer. There has also been a number of actions taken by the Scottish Government to support the equity agenda within the ELC. As part of the expansion, children and families can now access 1140 hours of funded ELC. This has meant that children are able to spend an increased amount of time in settings where practitioners are able to support health and well-being, learning and development, and also settings are aware that an increase in this time is only effective if the children experiences high-quality opportunities. So this has led to reflecting on the pace of the day and the needs of the individual children, in not only learning outdoors and in, but the opportunities available to rest, sleep, and have quiet times if they so wish. This has been a big change for some settings who previously may have had an AM-PM model, but our feedback from practitioners is that they reflect on their approaches, and this is key to ensuring that they truly meet children's needs and achieve equity. Furthermore, there has been the establishment of 435 equity and excellence leads who were opened in 2018 to work with every local authority. The purpose of these roles is to work directly with settings in the highest areas of deprivation to help close the poverty-related attainment gap. Equity and excellence leads have the opportunity to directly impact on practice in our settings by using the data available to them to get to know the children's needs, identify the gaps, and give advice to support practitioners to develop higher quality practice as a team. And finally, another example, as part of the expansion and in order to improve health and well-being at this crucial stage in a child's development, funding for lunches is provided by all children receiving their 1140 hours of entitlement, whether provided by the local authority or providers in the private and third sector delivering the funded entitlement. Eligible childcare settings are also giving agreed funding to provide cow's milk, or an alternative where they cannot drink cow's milk, and a portion of fruit or vegetables to preschool children who are in registered daycare for 2 hours or more. So with these examples in mind, let us take a few moments to consider. In your setting, the day-to-day practices which you and your team and your partners do to make sure that all learners are achieving their potential. And how do you improve outcomes for learners and their families, thinking through that poverty lens? The Best Start Bright Futures document includes further information around increasing the Scottish child payment to £25 per week per child by the end of 2022, and other steps to mitigate the benefit cap as fully as Scottish Government can within the scope of devolved powers. Scottish Government wish to scale up employment support for parents, with the aim of supporting up to 12,000 of them to ultimately enter and sustain employment. They also hope to invest up to £5 million in 2022-23 from the Tackling Child Poverty Fund and leverage the full package of funding set out throughout this plan to support the work of pathfinders, bringing together partners in a locality to overcome barriers and maximise the use of resources to provide holistic support tailored to the individual needs of families. Scottish Government also hope to build on the learning of their Social Innovation Partnership to work with up to 300 people, providing deep, adaptable, person-centred support that strengthens well-being, while addressing short-term needs and supporting long-term aspirations, including employment and other positive destinations. There will also be an investment of up to £9.75 million, and alongside other funding from the Hunter Foundation, that will include relational support, delivery of accessible, funded childcare options, and close working with employers to promote flexible working and well-being in the workplace. This is only a snapshot of what is contained in the document, so it is well worth a read. As a next step, you may also wish to read your local authority's Child Poverty Action Plan. As mentioned previously in the session, the current policy context is recognising the importance of the full learner journey from ELC to senior phase. Putting learners at the centre towards a future vision for Scottish education sought the views of a variety of stakeholders across the country to capture what is working well in Scottish education and what needs to change. Some of the key messages around the early years included ensuring an increased recognition of the role and value of early years, including their approaches to learning and teaching and the use of outdoor learning, and setting the direction of travel for the lifelong journey of learning by all children. The increasing focus being given to outdoor learning and to active, play-based, relationship-centred learning in the early years and early primary. Within learning and teaching, there was a strong support for extending some of the play-based learning, teaching and assessment practices seen in the ELC into early primary classes. And finally, the lack of coherence was also recognised across education by the lack of recognition given by some in the school sector to the ELC sector in building the strong foundations for children to become lifelong learners. Overall, it was felt that an agency with a broad remit beyond curriculum and assessment could be a key driver to effecting improved outcomes for all learners, from ELC through to the senior phase and beyond. From our discussions and exploration of previous policy changes, the essence of the new Scottish Attainment Challenge is embedded within the early years. The new framework for recovery and progress in relation to the refreshed mission identifies improving leadership, learning and teaching, and the quality of support for families and communities, and targeted support for those impacted by poverty as the key levers to improve outcomes for children and young people. This is no different whether you are within the EL sector, a primary, or a secondary school. Furthermore, in relation to transition, the new Scottish Attainment Challenge Framework for Recovery and Progress specifically mentions that pupil equity funding and/or strategic equity funding could be used to support vulnerable learners at points of transition. This can include widening targeted support in the primary to those learners in the ELCs and partnership settings. For example, this might be exploring the vocabulary gap evident within the ELC-aged learners and doing a partnership project to include the primary. The inclusion of the UNCRC, with particular reference to Articles 29 and 31, as well as GIRFEC, is welcomed, I am sure, by all those working within the early years, as this is the bread and butter of your work. It is also extremely important to consider equalities within any work in relation to the refreshed mission. These include considering learners who may be at higher risk of disadvantage through protected characteristics such as gender, sexual orientation, additional support needs, or are looked after or may have caring responsibilities. And finally, within the Refreshed Missions guidance, the Scottish Government have identified 6 priority family groups who are disproportionately affected by poverty. These include lone parent families, minority ethnic families, young mothers under the age of 25, children under the age of 1, and larger families with 3 or more children, as well as those families living with either a parent or child with a disability. These priority groups need to be supported in a variety of ways to help remove barriers which may be preventing them to achieve their full potential. Early years workforce are essential to creating the positive relationships between education, home and the community, which is needed to understand the associated barriers and put mitigations in place to overcome them.